Right now, somewhere in London, there's a building that exists because the British government tried to burn a pile of sticks. Not dynamite, not gunpowder, not some kind of military weapon. Sticks, pieces of wood, about this long, and the fire those sticks started was so massive it burned down the entire British Parliament. But that's actually the end of the story. The beginning is way weirder. It's the year 1100. England has a new king. His name is Henry I, and Henry has a problem. His kingdom runs on silver pennies, tiny little coins stamped with his face. But the coins are garbage. See, England doesn't have a single government mint. It has about 150 independent moneyers scattered across the country, each one responsible for making coins in their own local workshop. And these moneyers are supposed to use a very specific amount of pure silver in every coin. But here's the thing about trusting 150 guys. To be honest with silver, they won't be. The moneyers were skimming, mixing cheap metal into the coins, stamping them out lighter than they should be. And the public knew it. People started cutting coins in half just to check if the silver went all the way through. Merchants refused to accept coins unless they could physically test them first. The entire economy was grinding to a halt because nobody trusted the money. Contemporary accounts say that a man holding a full pound of coins couldn't even buy a penny's worth of bread because nobody believed the coins were real. Henry's solution was, let's say, direct. In 1124, he summoned every moneyers in England to the city of Winchester. About 150 men walked through the gates. 94 of them were found guilty of debasing the currency, and Henry had every single one of them castrated and their right hands chopped off in public. Let me say that again. The King of England gathered every coin maker in the country into one city and mutilated 94 of them in a single day. That fixed the coin quality problem pretty fast, but it didn't fix the bigger problem. Even with honest moneyers, England simply did not have enough silver. You can't run an expanding kingdom on a metal you have to dig out of the ground. Every time the king needed to fund a war, or build a castle, or pay off a local lord, he needed more silver than the mines could produce. The coins were never going to be enough. So Henry did something that sounds insane to a modern brain. He looked at a piece of wood and said, "That's money now." Here's how it worked. A clerk at the Royal Treasury would take a stick of polished hazelwood, about a foot long, squared off on the edges. Then they'd carve notches into it. Not random notches. A very specific code. A notch as wide as your palm meant £1,000. A notch as wide as your thumb meant £100. A notch as wide as your little finger meant £20. A notch the width of a swollen barley corn meant £1. A thin slit meant 1 shilling. A single pinprick meant a penny. Then the clerk would write the payer's name and the date along the side in ink. And then they did the clever part. They split the stick in half, lengthwise, right down the middle. The longer piece was called the stock. The shorter piece was called the foil. The person who paid the money got the stock. The treasury kept the foil. And here's why this was genius. Wood grain is like a fingerprint. When you split a stick, the crack follows the natural pattern of the fibers. That pattern is completely unique. No two splits are ever the same. So if you wanted to verify a payment, you just brought the two halves back together. If the grain lined up perfectly, the record was real. If it didn't, someone was lying. You could not forge this. You could not fake the grain of a piece of wood. A medieval stick was more counterfeit proof than a modern $100 bill. Now stop and think about what just happened. The King of England, in the year 1100, looked at a country full of illiterate farmers and corrupt coin makers, and invented a financial recording system that didn't require anyone to read or write. You didn't need to be educated. You didn't need to understand numbers. You just needed two pieces of wood that fit together. If they matched, the deal was real. The entire financial system of England ran on this. Tax payments, government debts, royal expenses, all of it, carved into sticks of wood. But here's where it gets really wild. The sticks started being traded. Think about it. If you held a stock that said the king owed you £100, that piece of wood had real value. You could walk up to a merchant, hand him your half of a stick and say, "The crown owes me £100. I'll sell you this claim for 80. The merchant takes the stick. He's just bought government debt at a discount. He can hold it or sell it to someone else, or eventually present it to the treasury and collect the full amount. This is exactly how modern government bonds work. And the word for the person holding that longer piece of wood? The stockholder. That is where the word comes from. Not from warehouses, not from inventory. From a guy holding a stick of hazelwood in medieval England. The London Stock Exchange, stockholder, stock market, stock options. All of it traces back to a split piece of wood. The system worked so well that it lasted for over 700 years. To put that in perspective, the United States has only existed for about 250 years. The US dollar has only existed for about 230. Paper money in Europe has only been widespread for about 300 years. A stick of wood outlasted all of them. Kings came and went. The Magna Carta was signed. The Black Death killed a third of Europe. The Renaissance happened. Shakespeare wrote his plays. The English Civil War tore the country apart. The monarchy was restored. And through all of it, the sticks kept working. Tax collectors kept carving notches into hazelwood. The treasury kept matching foils to stocks. Merchants kept trading them in secondary markets. 700 years. But then, in 1694, something changed. England founded the Bank of England. And once you have a real national bank with paper records and printed banknotes, a pile of notched sticks starts to look a little embarrassing. The government began phasing them out, slowly. By 1826, tally sticks were officially abolished. But here's the problem. After 700 years of government accounting, the Treasury had accumulated a monstrous pile of old tally sticks, cartloads of them, mountains of hazelwood, stacked in the basement of the Houses of Parliament, and somebody had to get rid of them. Now, a reasonable person might say, just throw them in the Thames, or burn them in a field, or give them away as firewood. But this is the British government, so naturally they chose the worst possible option. On October 16, 1834, a clerk named Richard Wobley was put in charge of destroying the old sticks. And Wobley had an idea. The Houses of Parliament had two big coal-burning furnaces underneath the House of Lords. Wobley told two workers, Joshua Cross and Patrick Furlong, to feed the tally sticks into the furnaces. Here's what Wobley didn't think about. Coal burns hot but slow. Low flames. Steady heat. Seasoned hazelwood burns fast and tall. Massive flames. Intense, unpredictable heat. Cross and Furlong spent the entire day shoveling 700 years of financial records into furnaces that were never designed for wood. By the afternoon, visitors to the House of Lords noticed the floor was getting hot. Smoke was seeping through the walls. Two tourists trying to look at tapestries in the Lord's chamber couldn't see anything because the room was filling with smoke, and the workers just kept shoveling. By 5 o'clock, Cross and Furlong finished their shift and went home. By 6 o'clock, the doorkeeper's wife noticed flames shooting out from under the door of the House of Lords. The copper lining inside the furnace flues had collapsed from the heat. The fire had spread into the wooden joists under the floor, and then the entire Palace of Westminster was on fire. It was the largest fire in London since the Great Fire of 1666. The House of Lords, gone. The House of Commons, gone. Hundreds of years of architecture, tapestries and records gone. Thousands of Londoners lined the riverbanks to watch their own parliament burn. A young newspaper reporter named Charles Dickens was in the crowd that night watching the flames. He later described the tally sticks as worn-out, worm-eaten, rotten old bits of wood that had managed to destroy the halls of government. The only major structure that survived was Westminster Hall, saved by the firefighters and a change in the wind. The Parliament building that stands in London today, the one with Big Ben, the one you've seen in every movie about England, that building exists because they had to rebuild after a pile of sticks burned down the original. Now let me tell you the part that history books usually skip. Before the fire, before the abolition, the tally stick system had already survived one of the most catastrophic financial crises in English history. In 1672, King Charles II was broke. He'd been borrowing heavily from London's goldsmith bankers to fund wars against the Dutch. These goldsmiths were the original bankers. They accepted deposits from ordinary people, merchants, widows, orphans, and then lent that money to the king at interest. And the king's debt to them was recorded on tally sticks. When Charles couldn't pay his debts anymore, he did something breathtaking. He announced the stop of the Exchequer, which is a fancy way of saying he simply refused to pay anyone back. £1.2 million of government debt, gone, just like that. The tally sticks those bankers were holding became worthless overnight. Goldsmith bankers who had built their entire businesses on trusting the king's wood went bankrupt. Their depositors, ordinary people, lost everything. Some of the most powerful financiers in London ended up in debtor's prison because a king looked at a pile of sticks and said, "Those don't count anymore." Does that sound familiar? A government issuing debt instruments it can't back up? A financial system built on trust that collapses when the trust disappears? Ordinary people losing their savings because the people at the top decided to change the rules? The tally stick system experienced a sovereign debt default, a banking crisis, and institutional corruption, 700 years before anyone invented a credit default swap. And here's the part that should genuinely keep you up at night. The word exchequer itself, England's entire treasury, gets its name from a checkered tablecloth. Medieval officials would lay out a cloth with a grid pattern on a big table and use counters on the squares to calculate taxes, like a human abacus. That's the exchequer, a tablecloth and some pebbles. The Chancellor of the Exchequer, the person who controls the entire British economy today, is named after a picnic blanket. Every piece of modern financial language traces back to something absurdly primitive. Stop. From a stick of wood, exchequer. From a tablecloth, foil. From the short end of a broken twig. The entire architecture of modern finance is built on top of metaphors from the Middle Ages that nobody bothered to update. So here's what I need you to understand. The tally stick system lasted 7 centuries because it solved an eternal human problem. How do you create a record that two strangers can both trust? The answer in 1100 was split a stick. The answer in 1694 was print a banknote. The answer in 2009 was mine a Bitcoin. The technology keeps changing. The problem never does. You need two parties to agree that a record is real, and you need to make that record impossible to fake. Henry I figured that out with hazelwood and a knife, and then his government got so lazy about cleaning up after itself that it accidentally burned down its own parliament. 700 years of the most successful financial technology in human history, and it ended as a bonfire in a basement. The sticks that built an empire nearly destroyed the building that ran it, and the number on your banking app right now is the direct descendant of a notch carved into a piece of wood by a medieval clerk who couldn't read. Not one satisfying detail of that story is made up.